Welcome to the Stream of Art podcast. Join me, Robyn.
And me, Michelle, as we chat openly about personal growth, creativity, and building a career in the arts. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 16th episode of the Stream of Art podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about how we approach learning art and music. But first, as always, we're going to just do our check-in. So, Robyn, how did your week go?
It was productive.
Oh, good.
Yeah, okay, so the commissions still aren't done. One of them is done, and one of them has like an hour left. I was working on it late last night because I was like, oh, I need to get it done before the podcast so that I can say I finished them. But I was so tired, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to like do this while I'm tired, because that's when I start to rush things and make mistakes and all that stuff. Yeah. But they're very close. But the thing that was most exciting, which this feels like a huge win for me, and probably for anyone who is like tech savvy, you're going to be like, that's why you're getting excited about this. But I've been wanting to kind of revamp my newsletter, but there's been some changes. I don't really know. Essentially, I needed to get like a proper email address. So like right now I'm just using like an @Gmail, but I have to get like a proper like Robyn@robynlester.com email address. So I got that through my, like I use Square for my website. So I got a deal through them for Google Workspace, and I set that up. But then I had to figure out how to like update the MX records. And all of that was like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what DNS is. And so I've seen this stuff and I'm so confused. And then Google is giving me instructions and they're telling me that my domain host is register.com. So I go to log in because I thought that like I would have to do something there, but then register.com doesn't recognize me as and so I'm like, wait, what? And then I remembered that I ended up transferring my domain to Square, which was Weebly one at the time. And so anyways, long story short, I figured out who was actually hosting my domain, and then they were able to tell me where to go to like update my MX records, and I did it. And so then I have a functioning, and it felt like I was so excited. And I like everyone I've talked to since I've been telling them about this, and they haven't been getting as excited as, you know, like when you want someone to kind of like echo back that excitement, and it's just kind of like, oh, cool, good for you. Like, no, you don't get it though.
It's like, you don't understand. Let me walk you through it.
Yeah.
I get it. As somebody who had to do that to get I remember that the whole like the DNS getting things linked. Yeah. It's quite complicated if you aren't that way savvy. Yeah. Like it's definitely a challenge. So like I understand your excitement. Like I think it's totally justified because it feels like such a burden, and it's something that is easy enough to put off. Like it's not like your life depended on it. It's not like, you know, your income depended on figuring it out right in this moment, but you stuck with it. And I think maybe that's even where part of that's coming from. It's that you stuck with something that was important to you for your work. Yeah, and it's been kind of the thing that I need to do, because so I want to launch my newsletter, right? Like I mean I have it, but I can't use it right now because I don't have the proper kind of email set up, right? So I wanted to relaunch the newsletter by the end of the month. So I'm okay, well I have to do my email. And then I also want to update my website, but I didn't want to start updating my website until I got that sorted out, just in case it messed with my website. And so like there's all these things and I want to promote my commissions, but you know, it's like I was kind of waiting. This was one of the pieces I was waiting on before the rest can kind of like pan out. So it was, and again, like I've been putting this off for like a month or something, and I've been like, it's been this kind of thing that's been niggling, and I never really knew. I was so concerned it would be a bigger thing than it ended up being. So it was built up in my mind as this like huge thing to overcome. And I'm also that person who, if you give me a set of instructions, I'm not just going to follow them. Like I need to understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it before I'm just comfortable following the instructions that Google has provided. And like, I'm sure that they're accurate, although to be fair, they weren't fully accurate. But I was like, so I was researching as I go too. So I'm like, I need to understand at least a little bit about what this all is, instead of just blindly following this set of instructions that
someone who I don't know has provided. Anyways, so that was my big win for the week. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And I tested it, and it's still, everything is working properly. And yeah.
Awesome. I'll have to sign up for your newsletter then.
Yeah, if you go to my website, which is robynlester.com, you will have one of those really annoying pop-ups come up and say, subscribe to my newsletter.
I love those.
Oh, man. Aren't they I know, like, there's, part of me hates myself for having that enabled on my website, but sorry.
I mean, I personally don't mind it that much if I'm going to somebody's website. It means that I'm interested in what they have to offer. And sometimes it is nice to just sign up for their newsletter right away. Or sometimes, too, if it's that you can sign up for their newsletter sort of by way of downloading a free ebook or whatever, that'll come up. And it's kind of nice to know that, you know, I've been getting that from a lot of like the mixing engineers I'm learning from. They'll have something pop up and be like, get my, you know, cheat sheet or get my whatever. And it's just like some helpful resources for me as I'm trying to get better. And then, of course, getting their newsletter is very helpful. So I actually kind of appreciate that when it's somebody like whose opinion I actually care about.
Right.
When I'm just going to a website, and this happens sometimes with websites where I'm trying to solve a problem and it's often like computer related. And then something pops up like subscribe. I'm like, no, I don't care. I just want to fix my problem. Then that gets a little bit irritating. I have to close the window. But then the X is like really hard to find. You're like, where is it? And then it pops up again on the next page you go to because their settings are messed up. So like for me, I have it set so it should only pop up once. And then there's like a month and then it'll pop up again for you. So like if you're to revisit my website, from the same computer or whatever. Yeah. I hope that's how I have it set up. But you bring up a good point because I'm just thinking like for me, when I go to a site, if I'm checking out an artist and it's like, sign up for my newsletter immediately before I've even had a chance to look through their website, I won't do it. Like I need to be enticed, and I'm not going to get enticed until I see what they're kind of providing through their website. And so I'm just actually rethinking like the pop-up for me is only effective if someone is coming to my site with the intention of signing up for the newsletter. That's very true. So I wonder then if there's a way for you to have it displayed maybe like towards the top of your homepage so that somebody who's going there, it's easy for them to find, but it's not becoming this barrier to people who are just trying to get to know you. Yeah, I might have to I'll have to fiddle with that a bit. But anyways, so I'm excited about that. I'll get my newsletter stuff set up on the back end, and hopefully I will actually send out one by the end of the month, which I realize now is actually quickly approaching. So that I might not hit that, but at least I'm one step closer. You are. Yeah. And you know, like you're saying, this is something that was getting in the way. Now the other stuff can happen. I always find like that feels like such a relief to knock something off your list that then makes it possible to do all the other things. Yeah. And the website updating is going to be a big one too. Because like right now, all the work I have on there is from like my more experimental abstract type series of work, which is not what I'm wanting to emphasize. So yeah, things are super out of date, but it's good. I think it's the stick with itness too that it's so easy to just be like, oh, well, I guess I won't do a newsletter then. But I'm like, no, I can figure this out. If I can figure out Notion, I can figure this out. Definitely. Yeah, I think that's definitely just the right attitude to take. Stick with it. Keep coming back at it. Obviously you're feeling inspired to write a newsletter for a reason. Yeah. You'll get it done. Yeah, it's something on all that messiness. Yeah, it's been something on my list to grow my newsletter. That's been on my list of things to do and to prioritize for like the past year and a half, and I just haven't. Mm-hmm. So I think I have a really good kind of template planned out that would be simple enough for me to do every month. Like it's not it's not text heavy, and it should be enjoyable for people to look through. So yeah, I'm hoping that there'll be a positive response. But anyways, how was your week and how was getting back into routine? It was great. It felt like coming home in a way. Nice. I was able to just slip right into it. So definitely the getting up early has been a challenge just because I'm really struggling to get to sleep right away. Yeah. Like I'm getting to bed at a good time, I'm getting all my journaling and my reading and all of that done. But when I turn out the light, I find my mind is just still so active, and it's keeping me awake until, 11 or later. So I think a lot of that will just get cleaned up as I continue with this schedule. I think it was just the sort of abrupt shift in my sleep schedule by like a few hours that my body just has to acclimate to. So I'm not too concerned. And I still feel like I'm actually functioning pretty well given how tired I am.
Nice.
And I think a lot of that just comes from having like this very clear-cut routine to follow. So something I realized is, just the power of habit, because even though I haven't been doing this routine for a little while, like it wasn't, like months and months and months, but it was long enough that, I had gotten quite far off. Even though it had been so long, I came back to it and it just felt like I automatically, everything clicked into place. And so all these habits that I built up where I'm getting up early and I'm doing the journaling and I'm, doing my reading, all of that it just happened. Like I just did it. It felt like it was so deeply ingrained in my system that everything just fell into place. Like even all the evening routine stuff where, I finish dinner and then it immediately triggers the habit of washing the dishes and brushing my teeth. And like I have this whole series of activities I do. And it's like my whole day is basically just like a big habit stack.
Right.
Where everything stacks from the time I get up in the morning. And it got me wondering, is that maybe something worth considering as a sort of sign of a routine's effectiveness? Is how easy is it to get back into, and how well does the whole system work? Because I feel like I, intentionally or not, I'm not even sure if I don't remember if I actually strategized my routine to work this way, but to have, everything flow so well in such like a logical, sequential way that I don't have to think about it. I just move through my day, and then before I know it, it's like it's time for bed. Like I've been like present through my day and like doing my work and engaged, but there wasn't ever a sense of, I don't know what to do next. It flowed. And I wonder if that is something worth considering for people who are building routines, or even just for me as I, construct routines or adjust my routine in the future, if that's something I should be using as a metric to determine how effective it is.
Well, or on the flip side, what it could be indicating is just that you had done that routine for long enough that it had become cemented as habit. So while you've been off it, it's been feeling so terrible because what you've been doing is essentially living a life without habits, which that is more draining for our brain, because then there's that what do I do next question all the time, right? So it could be just the reason it was so easy to fall back into it is it could be that was already so cemented. Like for me right now, I'm in a phase where I have to fight the instinct every night to watch something on TV. So I'm still, because that is the habit I'm used to. And it's going to take me time to get used to another habit, which is to not watch anything and to read instead. So at the moment, if I were to default back, that would be the thing that feels easy and normal, right? But with time, as I fight that, I'll develop that other habit, and then that will replace. And so then those nights where I watch something will actually feel weird, because what I'm used to are the times where I'm not watching anything and I'm reading instead. So I'm wondering if that's kind of what's happened here too.
Yeah, as you said, that makes 100% sense, because of course a habit is something that you've done repeatedly, which is why bad habits are so tricky to get rid of. Yeah, because they, even if you don't want them, even if they're not working, they'll stick to you like glue. Yeah. So you're exactly right. And I guess I'm just fortunate that the routine I have seems to work. Although that makes me want to rethink it a little bit. Is it the best sequence? Maybe there's something there that could be better, but right now it seems like it's working because of habit.
It feels easy because it's habitual, but is it ever, is it what you need? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that is something I'm trying to be better about, being more reflective on these things, really asking myself the question, is this the best thing I could be doing, the best way I could be doing it. I think what I'm doing right now is working.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stick with it, but I want to keep asking those questions, because if at some point it stops being effective, I want to be aware. I don't want to ever just engage in something without thinking about it. Like, right. I want to develop the habits, like the good habits, so that I can do those things without having to engage a lot of willpower, like it just happens. But that does, of course, run the risk of just doing something that isn't serving me just over and over out of habit. So it's really, I guess it's really it is definitely a balancing act of getting to the point where your good habits are just automatic, while also constantly questioning how you're doing things, just in the event there's something that's not actually serving you. And I guess that's where doing the journaling is probably helpful. I can start to notice if I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling like I'm not making progress in the areas I think I should be. And that is actually something I've been thinking about as far as this routine. I'm not going to be sticking with this forevermore. I'm going to stick with it probably for the next 4 weeks. And then I'm going to probably give myself a week where my routine, like the structure of my schedule, is going to be the same. But I think I'm going to give myself like almost like an RPM week, in the sense that I'm just going to work on writing music through that week. Not necessarily just writing. It'll be stuff for my album. But I was thinking in terms of, just how much progress I made through February with these songs, because I gave myself that time.
Yeah.
But of course I want to get into practicing. So that's what I've been doing a lot of over the last week. I've been working on my album as well, but I've been getting in my vocal practice and my guitar practice and all of that. So it'd be nice to make that be sort of a little bit more of the focal point for the next, several weeks. And then to have a week or even 2 where my priority is just like making a lot of progress on my album. So it's like always moving forward, but then I have a big leap.
Yeah, or like basically a creative retreat. So
yeah, exactly.
You have a week where it's like your routine, because if you were to do a creative retreat, your routine and would get shaken up, right? So yeah, because I think there is value in stepping out of the thing that we do every day.
100%.
Yeah. And I think that's where you can kind of helps you gain clarity on like what in your day-to-day needs to shift as well. So like stepping away from that will help you determine what are the things that you really miss about how you structured your time, and what are the things where it's like, oh, actually I could structure it a bit differently to work better for me or to push me or whatever.
Yeah,
that's cool. I like that. I like the idea of giving yourself a week, maybe even like every week, like every month or every 2 months or something to
exactly. Yeah, I think, and I've been very inspired by Cal Newport's book Slow Productivity, because he talks about seasonality, which we did our very first full episode about seasonality, but this sort of like rekindled my interest in really baking it into how I work. And so I was thinking in terms of having like a stretch of 4, 5, 6 weeks where I'm doing like my main routine, and then taking a week or 2 to do just a creative routine where I'm just working on original music. And I'm also considering maybe having the week following that be a bit more of a rest week. So maybe I sort of dial things back. Maybe I spend more time just reading, going for more walks, especially now that we're getting into the nicer weather. By the time I'll be taking a week off, it'll be really nice, and I can go and like walk to the library or walk to a bookstore or like go see a movie or something. Just do something, where I'm not just sitting around doing nothing, but I'm engaged in some really good sort of regenerating activities that are just a little bit removed from what I'm doing, but that might offer some inspiration or, something like that. So it's something I'm sort of playing around with. I'll sort of see how I feel. But right now I'm really happy with being back in my routine. Again, it feels like I wasn't myself for a few months, and now I feel like myself again.
Yeah.
And I got a blog post written, and, I got all my stuff practiced. I made great progress on one of the songs for my album. So I feel very accomplished, and I'm excited to keep going.
Yeah. Feeling accomplished is always a good thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty important. Or feeling like you're moving things along is,
definitely
important.
Yeah. It's like being able to just sort of bask in like having some level of competency that I was able to do something and do something that's really important to me too, because, I'm sure a lot of people out there feel like they've accomplished a lot, but they've done it for other people. I'm very lucky, and I don't acknowledge this often enough, but I'm very lucky that I get to be productive for myself, for the thing that is the most important to me in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very fortunate place for me to be in, and I just don't want to squander it. I think that's part of why I've been so motivated to build routines and, you know, be very structured and disciplined, is because I think music is just the most incredible thing, and that I get to be a musician feels like such a gift, and I just want to make the most of it and be able to, you know, have the best experience I can have with it, and also help in whatever way I can other musicians have the same thing. So I sort of also feel newly inspired, I think, this week.
Yeah.
To really dig back into, like, what is it I'm here to do, and how do I do it as well as possible?
Right. Well, that, I feel like, segues really nicely into the topic for today.
I was just thinking that. I was like, whoa, great segue.
It's almost
Good
like we
job,
scripted
me.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. This was not scripted. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about how each of us approaches learning our crafts. I'm very curious to hear your approach to learning art and honing your craft.
It's a really interesting question. And what I realized, I think the thing that popped to mind for me was, like, we need to keep in mind our learning styles when we approach learning art, whether that's music or painting or drawing or whatever. And for me, my learning style, I think, is just figuring it out as I go. So,
okay.
And I've talked about this before, where, like, with music, like I did music lessons. I just wanted to play the song. And I didn't like the kind of having to learn certain piece, like, you know, you need to learn your notes first, or like you need to, you know, I just wanted to learn how to play the song. And when I realized, I'm like, I was the same with painting. Like, I didn't, I could have, and I think for someone who's more of a methodical learner, you would look at kind of breaking it out. Like, I'm going to learn color theory first, and I'm going to, like, play around with color value, and I'm going to learn about composition, and you learn about the sort of different pieces, and then you're kind of building that foundation, and then you're kind of putting it all together. But for me, I just started by playing around with paint, and I wanted to paint a painting. Like, that was, so whether it was an abstract painting or a landscape painting. So that has always been my approach to learning, is just doing. And then what it means is that I have all sorts of early pieces that look like absolute garbage, because I didn't know everything I needed to know to execute well. But it's okay, because it's just a process, and it builds on itself. And I'm still learning new things. Like, I'm still painting things without really knowing how to pull off certain elements. And I figure it out as I go. Like, that is how I continue to learn. But it's interesting, because now I'm shifting to really seeing, like, some weak areas and thinking, like, oh, actually, I would really enjoy doing, like, right now, I'm like, I would really enjoy doing a course just on color value, because that's an area where I could use some development. And then perspective too is another area where I could use some development. So now I'm shifting to kind of concentrating on the individual pieces. But in many ways, I feel like I've approached it backwards, but it's worked for me, because I think that is my learning style.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because you and I are flip-flopped.
Yeah.
Because I'm very methodical.
Yep.
And I like to learn all of the
pieces,
building blocks first. I'm very much like that. I mean, in some ways, it's probably been to my detriment. I think I've talked before about how long it took me to write a song, because I kept feeling like I needed, like, one more piece, like I'm missing something.
Right.
When really I just needed to get started. You know, I don't know everything about music. I know a lot, but I don't know everything, but I still can write music, and it gets better with time. And I love the idea of you having this sort of timeline of your progress through your creations, that you have all these paintings, and you're saying they're not great when you start out, but you can watch them get better with time. I think that's really inspiring. And I often feel like I wish I had started writing songs earlier, because I think it would be really interesting to just hear that evolution,
right?
You know, in the way that you can see it with your art.
Yeah.
And I think it would have actually made me better, because it would have helped me to know what I needed to work on. Like it's really, I love what you were saying about how now you're feeling like you're seeing your weaknesses and that's inspiring you to want to go and take a course to improve those things. I think for me, I was just trying to collect pieces, but I didn't really know what pieces I needed. And so I was just kind of grabbing at anything that made sense. But you have you're going to save yourself a lot of time because you know exactly what it is you need to work on. And so you also have this extra level of motivation because it's for a purpose. Like I didn't need that. Again, I think that worked in my favor. And also maybe it meant I wasn't asking questions I should have, because I would learn anything. If I thought anything might be useful for music, I would learn it. Like I didn't care. So it meant that I was learning a lot of stuff pretty haphazardly and wasn't really linking things together. It wasn't until later, and I'll talk about that in a bit, that I was starting to learn how to connect those ideas. But I think ultimately any approach is valid. I think if you stick with it, you get there. Like it's interesting that you and I sort of like started and we sort of flipped.
Yeah.
It's like a mirror image. I think that's so interesting, but we stuck with it. We've both found something that works for us. And I think you can't go wrong. You'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah, I think, for me, like in terms of like learning tips for people, I don't have anything specific, but what I would say is set yourself up in the right environment to learn. And I think part of that involves like what you were kind of saying, where it's like just trust the process. But the other thing I thought about too is, and it's something to be mindful of for anyone who's coming at this and has some anxiety. So whether that anxiety is rooted in, being told as a kid that, oh, you have terrible singing voice, or like, oh, wow, that's an awful drawing. Because like some kids have heard these kinds of messages either from their peers or more disturbingly from other adults.
Yeah.
So I think there is, you could be coming to this with that anxiety, or even for adults who are coming to whether it's music or painting or whatever, as adults and you don't have any experience in this area and you're learning fresh, there's a lot of anxiety around that. So what I'd say to those people is, I mean, we've talked about seeking out constructive feedback and how valuable that is. And I think it's true, it is valuable. But if you're coming to this with kind of a level of anxiety, I would say do not seek out constructive feedback. You're already going to be so self-critical, and you're going to look at what you do and you're going to see all the areas in which it's not good enough and it's bad, and you're going to compare yourself to others. And so I'd say make sure you have someone in your corner who is looking at the things in whatever you're producing and seeing what is working well. Because I think that is what there's a lot of, I think, self-care that comes into place when you're starting out, and you need to be looking for the things that are working, because otherwise you're going to be completely demotivated. So, and you need to keep that motivation up to keep coming at this, because it's hard to learn. Psychologically, I think it's hard to learn and be in that kind of beginner space. So find the right people to champion you through the process, And I feel like I jumped way ahead, but it's just like, that's something I
think that's really helpful for people to hear. And yeah, it's sort of like guarding your artist's heart a little bit.
Yeah.
And I feel like, if I'm not mistaken, I think in The Artist's Way, she maybe said something kind of like that, like not sharing stuff too early, because like if you get really harsh criticism, it can really derail you if you're somebody who's very sensitive and you're just starting out. Yeah, I think that's where it's really critical to know, like you said, like to get the right kind of feedback. So to get somebody who's in your corner. And something we actually do in Courtney's group whenever we share music with each other is that we can each decide what kind of feedback we want to get.
Yeah,
and so there's like a different system. It'll be like if you just only want to hear the good stuff, and there's like different degrees. I can't remember all the stuff in between, or like all the way to like any kind of feedback.
Right.
So if somebody who's maybe just getting started and is really nervous to share it, then they get a chance to hear exactly like you said, like what's working. Yeah. And then that can be that little bit of a boost to say, well, maybe there's something here. Maybe I can work with this.
Yeah.
And then as you get better and you get more comfortable sharing with people and all of that, as your skills grow, you'll get to a point where you will want to improve more, and you'll recognize the value in getting some criticism about what you're doing.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to get to a point where I felt comfortable with that. And it's only now that I've had so much of it that I've seen the value of it. But I really could not handle that early on. It was much more of a hit to my my poor ego.
You've got to choose. You've got to choose your time, you know. And like for me, so like I started painting when I was 13, and the only reason I think that I stuck with it was because I got positive reinforcement. And like, you know, and I'm very grateful that my family has always been very supportive of my work. And I never heard constructive feedback from them. And like, you know, I think of my grandpa, who himself was an artist, and he was very well positioned to give me constructive feedback. He could have said, you know, oh, you got to like work on your color values. You got to work on your mixing here. Your brushwork is like, there's all sorts of stuff he could have told me in a helpful way, but he never did. He only ever focused on the things that I was doing. I don't want to say well, because I wasn't doing them well, but things that showed promise. He only ever brought my attention to those areas. And his only advice to me ever was keep painting. That was the only advice he ever offered me.
Yeah.
Although a little later on, he did say that I shouldn't make a business of this because that will destroy, which I see where he's coming from. Anyways.
Yeah.
But that keep painting. And I think that is, I got all the right messages when I started. And I think that is the only reason why I have continued, is because I received the right messages at the very beginning. And so I think it's extremely important for people to think of that as they're coming into this, because I think oftentimes, particularly with painting, there is so much emphasis when you're learning in a group setting around the constructive feedback, and
rather than like the support, encouragement.
And that's one thing I did. I've talked about this before. I took a course in Impressionism, and I really, really appreciated the instructor, because she would provide a certain amount of constructive feedback, but she put more emphasis on, I love how you handled like the paint there, or your use of color here is terrific. Like she focused on, because she could see, like she was teaching a bunch of adults who felt extremely insecure in this, and she could see that. And she's like, now is not the time to give them that kind of constructive feedback, because ultimately what they need, all they need is to keep painting. That's all they need in order to learn, is to keep trying and to keep learning and all of that stuff. But in order to do that, you need to keep painting. So that's the priority here. Yeah. Anyways, I think I'm done going on my little, I don't know what that was. It wasn't a rant, but it was like,
no, I totally agree with you. Yeah. I think it's so helpful to have somebody who sees your potential. And I think this is like a tricky thing for me just as a teacher, because I'm not doing my job if I'm not pointing out what a student needs to work on. But I'm trying to, as I improve as a teacher, I'm trying to find a really good balance where I'm pointing out the things that a student does well, because every student has something that they seem to like take to.
Yes.
And so I'm always trying to point out things like, you know, somebody who starts out on guitar who just naturally seems to be able to arch their fingers like just right. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, because some people really struggle with that. And so I'll say, I love how, you know, your fingers are just like really nicely arched and you're like right on the fingertips, and you know, that looks really good. And or somebody might just have, some people are just naturally, they have this really nice touch, and so when they strum or when they finger pick or whatever, there's just something very delicate and natural about the way they control, you know, the sound. And you know, pointing out little things like that can definitely help them. So it's a tricky balance for me, because I think when I started out with teaching, I was much more about like, okay, you got to work on this and this and this, and I was trying to think in terms of like, I'm just trying to help.
Yeah.
But you know, as I've had more experience, you learn how helpful it is to acknowledge. And even for a lot of people, I just try to acknowledge when I see they're making an effort.
Yes.
And I can see they're making improvement, that they're progressing, because learning guitar is really hard. You know, I will give it to anybody who takes the time to stick with it. Or I'll say, I'm really proud of you for sticking with this. I know it's hard. And I know, you know, for like the students I have who are in school, like I know it's hard to balance schoolwork and a social life and then trying to learn this instrument. Like, I'm really proud of you for sticking with it. You know, let's keep doing this. I see your potential. And then sometimes, you have to get a little tough with them when it's the same thing over and over again. It's just it's a very tricky thing to do. And I'm really coming to appreciate that as a teacher, just finding the right balance. And sometimes it's like a day-to-day thing. Sometimes a student can hear something, can take something that's like kind of tough. And sometimes you just know they're having a rough day and you have to bolster them. Say like, hey, you got this, you know, and always just reiterate that you're in their corner. And this is like true for anybody listening who just has somebody in their life who is pursuing something creatively. Just be in their corner. I think, like what you were saying before, I think that's very profound, just to not even just for people who are pursuing art to find somebody who's in their corner, but if you have somebody in your life doing that, to be the one who is in their corner.
Yeah.
I think that is incredibly helpful and incredibly meaningful. I definitely was very lucky to have that support as well. Yeah, so I have lots of thoughts on this.
I figured you would. I'm like, that's good because I don't have too many. As someone who doesn't teach, and as someone who was a really, I don't want to say lazy learner, but I do find that like a really funny phrase to apply to myself. I'm not methodical, so it's, like with this topic, I was like, how do we approach learning? I'm like, I don't know if I do. I just kind of do it and figure it out.
Yeah, but I think it's good to ask that question of yourself. And again, this is why I sort of wanted to talk about this now, because both of our perspectives are inevitably going to change. As I start sharing my thoughts and ideas out into the world more, they're going to get shaped by feedback, and they're going to change as other people hopefully can take what I talk about and apply it to what they do. And as you start to eventually do workshops or any kind of teaching, your perspective is going to change. It's going to be really interesting to keep coming back to it, because I feel very strongly about music and music education, and I want to do anything I can to help make it better. So this is just, I think, an important part of that conversation is just like, where am I at now? Because I've figured out a lot. I struggled for a lot of years, but I feel like I've come to a place where I'm kind of getting a better handle on what about it needs to improve in general, and what I need to do to improve. And I just kind of want to put that out there right now, and then I'm curious to see how it evolves. So firstly, I would like to address my rant last week. So for anybody who listened to the episode last week, episode 15 on routines, I went on a little bit of a rant.
Didn't I piggybacked off that rant, didn't I?
Yeah, we ended up having a conversation about misleading marketing for anything. In this case, for me, I was talking about guitar education. You're talking about in terms of like social media marketing, stuff like that. Anything that feels predatory, that feels like it's trying to sell you the easy answers, trying to tell you what you want to hear, that's ultimately not effective, or is just a tiny piece of a much larger puzzle. So it was prompted by my little rant about those YouTube guitar ads. So at first, I want to just acknowledge that I realized how very unstoic my outburst was. I had a couple of nights to sleep on it and thought that was not a great look. That was not me. That was not me being at my stoic best. So I just want to acknowledge that. And
so now I feel bad about ranting as well.
No.
Do I need to issue a public apology as well?
No, you don't.
Okay, good, because I refuse.
Not if you, no, yeah. It's like, my public apology is there will be no apology.
I am not being the bigger person.
I regret nothing. No, I just felt like, as somebody who has publicly proclaimed my status as a student of Stoicism, I just want to acknowledge that I realized how very unstoic that was. It, just the complaining ultimately without offering any solution, which is something I'm going to hopefully resolve today. Offer some ideas.
I appreciate this apology. I had to journal about it, actually, because it was so...
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry for the emotional turmoil that I've caused you, and no doubt your family.
And I was like, there's no solution.
Stress that I put on...
There was no solution presented. What do I do?
They're just complaining. And no, this is something, Marcus Aurelius talks about, is like, don't be overheard complaining, like not even to yourself. And that's something I am trying to work on. And I am better in a lot of areas. And I sort of was thinking about like, okay, this is obviously something I feel very passionately about.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to like get to the bottom of it and like use this as an opportunity to better understand like where is this coming from?
Right. Interesting.
And like to look at like what's a bigger solution. So first of all, I regret the sort of like sweeping accusations of, these kinds of people who are putting out these ads as just like being like hacks and shysters. Some of them will inevitably be. Some of them are probably just like me, just a musician trying to make a living. And if they've taken any kind of a marketing course. They're going to just be doing what they need to do to survive. I'm sure there are some of them like that. And I one of the things I want to work on is just being better about giving people the benefit of the doubt. So I don't want anybody out there to just assume that all of them are hacks. I'm sure some of them are fine. And I'm sure some of the information too is something that is of value. It's not going to be like completely void of value. It's just about putting it into context. And just to be aware, be aware that if somebody is trying to tell you that they have the key to unlock music, to unlock the fretboard, to unlock anything, those keys do not exist. Because music is not something that can just be unlocked. It is much more akin to a big jigsaw puzzle where you are assembling all these pieces and you're kind of slowly putting them together. And for anybody who's done a puzzle, which I'm sure is most of the people listening to this, you'll know the experience of taking some pieces and sort of you start to fit them together and you just don't really know how it fits. But if you keep with it, you keep finding the pieces that fit, eventually everything connects together. And music is going to be a lot like that, where you have a lot of these disparate pieces that you are able to connect, and over time the bigger picture makes sense. So it's really about putting these things in context. So again, I referenced, like, you'll get people who are offering, to show you some pentatonic patterns. Those are fine. They can be helpful and they can help you start to maybe break out of some habits. Maybe you do feel kind of closed into like one little, that's a very common issue for guitarists, to feel like they're boxed in, right? We have these pentatonic boxes, and usually one of the first things you can do to get out of that is to learn more than just that one shape, the one like shape everybody knows, and you start to connect them, but it's just about putting it in context to recognize that it is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And I wanted to talk too just about how, why is it that these kinds of things are so prevalent,
mm-hmm.
and why do people buy these things? And I think the reason is because learning music is really complicated and there's a lot to cover. Like there are just so many different things you can do. And I don't think there's a clear consensus about how to approach it. And probably for a lot of the reasons we were talking about earlier, that there are a lot of different ways to approach it. But what ends up happening, and this is my experience, is you're trying to move through all the different like exercises and songs and strategies and all of this, but you just don't really get a clear answer as to how to do something. So, like something I've really struggled with for a lot of years is improvising. And it's just because there wasn't a clear direction that I could find on how to do it beyond you practice improvising. But as I've come to understand, there's actually a lot of different pieces that go into becoming a good improviser. But it's just because they all can feel so separate. You just don't know how to assemble those pieces. So you're just kind of reaching for things. And so I think what would really help is to take this like holistic approach to learning music. So to understand the bigger picture, to, for the puzzle that you're assembling, to have that picture that's on the box, so that you know what you're working toward. And so you know that even as you're assembling the pieces and they aren't quite making sense, you have some level of trust that I know what it is I'm going for. And as long as I keep that picture as a guideline, I'm going to be able to find my way. And this is why I really like to think in terms of these sort of broader categories. Because if you look at anything you can practice with music, like a very common one people talk about all the time, scales,
mm-hmm.
right? Chords, technique, working on ear training, working on learning theory, working on sight reading. Like there's so many like little elements of things you can work on, but we can think in terms of where they fit categorically into how you're trying to develop as a musician. I think that will help to give you a bit more guidance and to feel less overwhelmed. Because if you're feeling like you have to work on all of those things at the same time, which I did for many years, I spent many years desperately trying to squeeze everything into every single day because I felt like I had to get it all together in order to get myself to a point where I was justified in putting myself out there, in really claiming my musicianhood and putting my music out there, putting myself, my ideas, whatever else. it's so overwhelming, and it really didn't, I mean, there was something to be said for the way I did it, because I learned a lot, but it wasn't until I really got a sense of the bigger picture that I feel like I've made true progress. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a new one. This is something I've been playing with, and I've mentioned this in our conversation about developing your artistic voice, but I'll talk about it again because it'll help me clarify how I'm currently thinking about growing as a musician, and how I'm starting to try to also think about my teaching as well. So if your goal is to be as, well-rounded and strong and free of a musician as possible, this is, I think, going to help get you there. So 3 categories. 1 is proficiency. 2, musicianship. And then 3, artistry. I'm not going to talk a lot about artistry because we already talked about that we have 2 episodes talking about your artistic voice. If you want a refresher, you can go back and listen to those episodes. But I will sort of touch on it because it is important to like the whole puzzle. So proficiency is anything that is related to your specific instrument. So for me as a guitarist, it's going to be about working on my technique on the guitar. So one thing I want to clarify is that there's a difference between technique and techniques. So sometimes people think about practicing technique and they think, oh, it means I have to sit and I have to practice my alternate picking and my sweep picking and my tapping and whatever. Those are techniques. And yes, you'll want to practice them if that's part of what you need for the music you play. But there's a difference between practicing techniques and then having good technique, which is how well you execute something. So I can be playing something, and if my technique isn't good, it's not going to sound good. I'm not going to be able to make it sound the way I want. So that's what I mean when I talk about technique. So regardless of the technique you're using, it's getting very confusing, but regardless of how you're choosing to play something, like what technique you're using, how well you play it is going to determine the control you have over your instrument, which is really what I think about in terms of proficiency. Like, to be proficient on your instrument is to be in control. So for a guitarist, that's also going to mean being really good at visualizing the fretboard in whatever way makes sense to you. I've talked before probably about the 2-point interval system that I use to visualize currently, that I got from Tom Quayle and David Beebe. I highly recommend checking that out if you're a guitarist, and probably a bassist too. I would assume it would apply to bass as well. But if you're interested in learning how to really visualize the fretboard very well, I definitely recommend checking that out. But that's something that is essential to being able to manipulate the instrument the way I want. I have to know where everything is and what it's going to sound like. Tone control too is something that I would put under that category. So for the guitar, that means in terms of my touch, so how I manipulate the strings will dictate the tone, but also tone in terms of the gear that I use. So for whatever gear I have, I need to be able to manipulate it in a way that gets the sound, that shapes the sound in a way I want. And that takes time. That's something I think I would also categorize as being under proficiency. So again, some of these ideas are still in their infancy, so some of the specifics might change over time, but right now that's sort of my thought process.
That's interesting, because that's kind of like in terms of translating that to art, to visual art. Proficiency would include like paint handling and composition and color mixing and all of that kind of the mastery of the material essentially. Or in the case of music, you're saying like the control over the instruments. Yeah. So for like singing, that would be like learning how to use your breath and like all the stuff that goes with singing, like things like that. That would also apply to like horn players. The breathing is very important. So like the things that are specific to your instrument, that would fall for me under the category of proficiency. Right. Okay. And part 2, musicianship. That's going to be anything that applies across the board to all musicians. Oh, okay. So this is going to be like having a good sense of time and rhythm and meter and all of that. This is going to be developing your ear. This is going to be like reading music, understanding theory and like the basic building blocks of music. This is going to be, I would even put under this category stuff like being able to control your dynamics and articulation and being able to listen. Like listening is really critical as a musician. Being able to use space, like stuff like that. And something that I'll talk about a little bit
to go as I continue with this conversation is how sometimes certain things are going to fall under more than one category. And so it's, you know, I would say don't get bogged down with like trying to fit everything. It's like some things will fit under more than one, and that's good. That gives you a sense of like what you can do to help move more than one category forward.
I just want to quickly translate. Because as you're talking, I'm trying to apply it to painting. So I reversed it. So I think what I said before, like color, composition, perspective, all that stuff, that would actually fall under the category of musicianship, but not musicianship, paintmanship.
Yeah.
Proficiency from a painting perspective might include figuring out how to use those tools to create artwork that falls within your specific style. Like that might be a way of kind of translating. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I'm just trying to conceptualize it.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
From an
I'm hoping
painting.
I would love for these ideas to be something that can be applied.
I think they can. It's just switching up the lingo a little bit. Yeah, because like with painting, of course, like we're not like control over the. Well, it is. It's like you need to figure out how to control the paint to create the effect that you want to create that aligns with your kind of specific style of art, I think is what I would. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Continue.
Yeah. And so any skill you develop under the musicianship category is going to apply regardless of the instrument.
Right.
So it's very helpful to develop those skills, and then that's part of what's going to help you very easily pick up another instrument.
It's like the core skills.
You've already established those core musical skills that will help you speak the language of music.
Yeah.
So that you can communicate with other musicians, you can collaborate with them. And I know this just from dealing with students, and why I'm always encouraging them to really take the time to make sure they understand what we're talking about. So, you know, we'll be using, you know, like musical lingo. Like I'll be talking about quarter notes and eighth notes. I'll be talking about, okay, we're playing in this key. We're doing like, that is part of the language of music, and it lets us communicate, because otherwise it's very cumbersome. Like I find this with guitar students before we've hit the point where we learn the notes on the fretboard. To try to communicate to them, it's like, okay, you're going to be on this string at this fret, this string, this finger. It's so many numbers, which is fine when you're starting out. Like that's just kind of part of the process. I talk about with guitar students, you have like 3 numbers you have to think about. You have to think about your finger number, the string number, and the fret number.
Right.
When you're trying to like make chord shapes. So that's an important part of it, of course. But when I'm trying to communicate with a student about what we're playing, I like to use real notes, because that's also more musical to be able to say, okay, we're playing, you know, this note and this note. Oh, and this is how it works because we're in this key, and this is this chord, and this is blah, blah, blah. So it makes it much easier to make connections.
Right.
So that's really important, you know, to just be able to speak musically. And then artistry is just anything that applies to how a musician expresses musical ideas.
Right.
So we each have that artistic fingerprint, musical fingerprint, and that's something that's going to be developed both by input and output. And again, I talked about this in more detail in that episode, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's just sort of a general idea is like you want to listen widely and then deeply. So find the few things that you really like and listen to them, and then create. And it's like this feedback loop. So as you're creating and you're learning, you'll be better informed about what is happening with the music you're listening to, and then you'll have a better idea of what you have to do to improve so that your art is elevated to a higher level.
And they all kind of play off each other, right? Like they
100%.
Like they all related, sort of, they all kind of impact each other. So like if your musicianship is kind of, if you haven't invested in your musicianship, then the proficiency and your artistry will hurt, kind of thing, right? And
you're 100% right. Yeah.
And yeah, anyways, okay, interesting. So I can see how they all interplay. Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly, you're exactly right. So proficiency and musicianship sort of come together, and they facilitate the ease with which you can express your artistry. Because you can be a really wonderful artist with wonderful taste, but if you just don't have the capabilities of getting your music out into the world, it's going to be very frustrating. And so that's often where there's that taste gap. You know, you maybe are very well versed in music, and you have good taste, and you understand what it takes to make a good song, but you just don't have the skills. And part of that's going to be proficiency if you're playing an instrument, or even if you're using a DAW, that's an instrument as well, very much. If you don't have musicianship, that's also going to slow you down. And I just know that from writing music, how often I turn to my understanding of the language of music to bring something. If I'm trying to accomplish something, musically speaking, maybe in terms of like a feel from a chord or a rhythm or whatever, the fact that I can speak that language means I'm able to do that quite seamlessly. And sometimes I'm not. And then that's an indicator that there's a gap there. And then I can use that to help inform where I have to focus my musicianship practice. And so that's also another piece of the puzzle, is that your artistry is going to dictate a lot of where you focus your attention on your proficiency and your musicianship. And I mean, musicianship, I would say just really go for the gusto. Learn as much as you can. Be as strong and well-rounded a musician as possible. And then the proficiency part is something I think that's a little bit more flexible, where, you know, there are certain things on the guitar I just don't invest as much time on practicing because it's just not a part of what I'm doing at this point. I mean, I'm also very much of the belief that the better you are on your instrument, the more free you're going to be. I studied with this great guitarist in music school named Philip Candelaria, and his philosophy around technique was that the better your technique is, the more songs you can play. Like you're set, really. Because every time you're learning a new song, you're always faced with your technical limitations, the limitations of your proficiency. But if you're working on and I would extend that, I would expand that to just say proficiency in general. So if your proficiency on your instrument is high, the speed with which you can learn songs is much higher, and the ease. Again, speed is less of an issue because I'm happy to spend a long time working on one song if I'm getting something out of it. But the ease with which I can approach learning something is much higher. So take care of your proficiency, but don't feel like you have to learn everything under the sun on your instrument. If you are more inclined to developing your artistry within a certain genre, or if you're a songwriter, or if you're doing covers, or there's all sorts of different ways you can express your artistry. Make sure you're focusing on the stuff that is going to elevate that. And then again, it all puts the whole picture together, and it saves you a lot of time because you're not going to be guessing about what you should reach for. You're going to know exactly, okay, this is what I'm working on. So these are the things that are probably going to help. And if you don't know what's going to help to get you where you want to go, that's where a teacher is very helpful, or a course or something like that. Just finding some sort of guidance. But at the very least, if you can articulate what it is you want, and that's where having a clear musical vision is very helpful. If you can articulate what you want, it's much easier to find the solutions that are going to get you there. So this is not to say that you're never going to struggle with trying to figure out what to work on, or that there won't be trial and error involved, because that's just the name of the game. There's still going to be some of that, but this is going to clear up a lot. Like, this is the kind of thing, if I had known this when I started, I would have saved myself so much time. But I ultimately think I had to be the one to go through this because it bothered me enough that I'm trying to come up with solutions.
So okay, so if we're talking like proficiency and musicianship, because to me, artistry is something that would kick in at a later point. So is there for beginners, what should they be focused? I'm assuming there is kind of a staged approach, focus on the musicianship first, and then the proficiency and musicianship, and then at a certain point the artistry can come into play. Or do you see this as simultaneous all at once?
That's a great question. I think you can approach it both ways. So when I first started learning guitar, I went proficiency first, because that's kind of what you have to do. If you can't play a chord, it's very difficult to understand why musicianship is important. So you could go the route of going, okay, I'm going to start with proficiency, and then I'm going to bring in some elements of musicianship. And it doesn't have to take very long. It can take within a couple of weeks, once you kind of get the hang of a couple of chords, before you start learning some musicianship. And then you can start thinking about artistry. But you can also think about it all at the same time, which is a little bit more of how I approach it when I teach. I try to do those things together in a way that makes sense. So it's also something you have to be cautious of, that you're not trying to do too much all at once.
Yeah.
And it's not the kind of thing, it's more of like an overall balance. So you know, you might have periods where you're more focused on developing your proficiency. Like a lot of guitarists go through those periods where they spend hours and hours just drilling different exercises to really get their chops up. That's a part of the process, and that's fine. Like you might go through years where you have certain stages where you're just focused on one thing. Like some people just more predominantly focus on the artistry. They kind of take an approach like the way you approach painting, where they just want to create something, and so they go and acquire the skills they need as they need them.
Yeah.
And again, that might work for somebody. It's just like, be aware of that and be aware of what works for you. But I think it's very hard to start thinking in terms of artistry as a musician in terms of creating right out of the gate. You need some degree of proficiency and some degree of musicianship to do it properly. Otherwise, again, it's just a recipe for frustration. Like somebody opening up a DAW for the first time and trying to record something, if their time feel is bad, if they can't play to a click, if they, you know, like can't make a chord sound clean, if you don't understand how notes and chords fit together, that stuff's going to be very challenging.
Yeah, this is where I feel bad for you musicians, because like with art, what's so lovely is like I started painting with very little understanding of anything. And I mean, I knew colors, right? Mm-hmm. But I could, because I painted abstract, and there's less, anyone can pick up a paintbrush and paint, because it is the only thing you need to know how to do is to physically put paint on a paintbrush and put it on paper or canvas. That's the only thing you need to know how to do in order to make something. But with music, it's a little trickier, because it's like you need to know. I mean, I guess you could say the same thing. Like, all I need to know is how to like strum, but that's not true. Like if you want to make it sound like something, there's more knowledge that comes into play. Whereas like you can make something that looks like something while painting without, it seems like there's not the same barrier to access almost, it seems like, you know, like,
yeah.
And not to say the paintings you're going to create without having any knowledge are going to be any good, but it still feels like it's less of a hill to climb to get yourself into it than with music.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And I don't know. This is something I know a lot of music educators, I think about, because we want music to be accessible, but there is a certain level of inaccessibility that comes with music. And I think I'm not the right person to approach that question. Maybe I'm wrong, and it's something that as I keep moving forward, I will maybe have an idea, because I still struggle with that with students who are starting out, especially when there isn't that strong sense of self-motivation.
Yeah.
Like nothing was going to stop me. This is it for me. And so I learned very quickly as a result. But the students I have where they're still struggling just to string 4 chords together after a year, I don't know what to do to help them beyond the stuff that I've already given them, which is the stuff that's going to work if they work it. But it's like, if they're not putting the time, I don't know if there is a way to get through to people who aren't just naturally driven. So I don't want to say there isn't. I'm not sure. I'm very much in a place of having way more questions than answers.
Yeah, it's tricky.
It is. I will say that there are some things you can try. So if you're somebody who's interested in learning how to make music and you have no idea where to start, I think there are some free DAWs that you can download. So maybe something like BandLab, where you can learn how to like drag and drop samples. And it might just give you like a sense of how some of these pieces fit together. That might be more accessible for somebody who's just kind of curious, maybe who isn't feeling the pull to learn a particular instrument right out of the gate. I would say try that and just see what you think. And I'm sure there are like an infinite number of tutorials. Actually, I think Ableton, on their website, they have some pretty good resources for like learning how to understand music. I'll have to double check, but I feel like they have some pretty good ones, just like to help give you kind of the basic building blocks so you can start playing around with making music in a DAW. And then, you know, if it's something you're interested in, you can sort of go from there, and maybe you're inspired to learn how to play an instrument. And if you already have that existing experience of making music and you like it, it might make it a bit easier to stick with.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting topic because I think of music in particular. Like I think the vast majority of us are somehow moved by music. Like we enjoy listening to it.
Yeah.
And I think what happens, and I think for me, my drive to learn, I didn't have again, like I wanted to play the song. And when I break that down, like ultimately I wanted to be involved in the music, but I didn't have the interest in learning the foundational pieces. I just wanted to be involved, but in an easy way. And this is where I'm thinking, like, getting like a little bongo or something so you can like play along. So you're like involved in the song, and you can get yourself engaged in that way, but without having to learn the nitty-gritty kind of thing, right? Like it's almost like there's two types of people who come to learning music. It's like there's people like me who there's just something in me. I just need to like be in it. But I don't want to learn the things. And then there's people who want to learn the things. So I don't know.
And that's something I like to talk about a lot. Is there's a big difference between wanting to be able to make music or be able to play an instrument and actually wanting to learn how to do those things. And I have that in my life too, with things where I'm like, I would be very interested in being able to do that thing, but I have no interest or just no time to invest in actually learning that thing. And I think that's a really important distinction to recognize, because, then it can save you from feeling like you should try to learn everything. Sometimes it's just nice to appreciate something. Maybe you have that appreciation for something and it just means you enjoy it more when you engage with it in whatever way it is you do. And maybe that's just like singing along to a song when you're in the car.
Right.
And that's enough. That, your relationship with music is your own. You get to decide what you want it to be. There are certain, like, of course, requisites if you're wanting to do something in particular. Again, like if you want to, like on the extreme end, be a professional musician, there are things you just have to do. You just have to suck it up. But if you're not interested in being a professional, or even like anybody who's particularly proficient, like you can just have a really beautiful experience with music, a lot of enjoyment out of it, just in whatever way makes sense to you. And maybe that means like getting some music instruction, but just enough to feel like you got what you needed. And that's fine. You get to decide. And that's, again, why I think it's so important to be clear about what you want. Sometimes you just don't know until you try it. Sometimes somebody might feel like, they want to do something and then they take a lesson and they realize, actually, not so much. That's fine. This is why I offer like introductory lesson packages. So somebody can kind of try the lessons out, or even just try out lessons with me. I think that's important too, is finding the right teacher for you. But then they can have that experience without having to commit long term. As something else you can consider, anybody who wants to do music, is join like a choir or a music group or something. I have a guitar student right now who plays with a guitar group, and they just play like really basic songs together. But it's the sort of finding your tribe, like finding the people who enjoy the same music, who want to do what you're doing. That can be really helpful as well, and also give you some more drive to maybe improve what you're doing, because it'll make the experience better. So, again, I think understanding how you operate and where your motivation comes from is really helpful to then choose strategies that'll help you.
I think that's a really good point, and that might be contribute to another reason why I don't stick with music. And it could be just because for me, I love the idea of like playing with people. And playing and so like the individual solo learning isn't as compelling to me, because to me I think there's a social element that I'm looking for from playing music that I'm not getting. And so then it becomes, obviously I'm not going to be as compelled to like practice on my own, and when there's none of that social element that comes into play ever, right? So that's a really good point.
Yeah. Maybe something we should do at some point is like a joint music art day, where we do like a big jam session, and we have people who come and who want to just do music. Ooh. And then people who like just want to try painting, and just have it like be really loose, just to have like, just people can come together. We'll keep everything really like basic, really comfortable, just to have the experience of being around other creative people, and maybe try to like experiment. Maybe somebody who hasn't tried music before but who likes to paint, we can rent some instruments, or like some bongos or something.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Accessible, and just like, make like a big jam / art session.
Yeah, that would be fun. Yeah, because art, like painting too, is a very isolating thing. I like painting in isolation. I really despise, and I think this is one of the reasons why, like when I started at Guelph, I started in the studio art program, and then I shifted out into art history. And I think a large part of that was because I really disliked painting in the group setting. And I've done workshops since where I've been learning in a group setting in person, and I just stiffen up. I don't like it. But there are people I think who do really enjoy painting in that group setting, right? Similar to how like I would prefer to play ukulele or guitar in a group of people versus just on my own. Yeah, interesting. But that sounds fun.
Yeah. Maybe something to think about a little bit down the road.
Yeah.
So one last thing I thought about as far as developing your artistry when you're just starting out on music or with music would be to just listen to lots of music.
Yeah.
So if you're starting lessons in a particular instrument, go and listen to lots of music that has that instrument and really start to develop your taste. So this is something Cal Newport talks about in Slow Productivity. The third principle of slow productivity is to obsess over quality. And one of his propositions is to develop your taste. And to develop your taste, not just in the realm that you're exploring. So like for me as a musician, obviously I need to develop my taste as a musician so I know what good is, I know what's possible, and I can try to reach for that. But he actually talks about doing that even outside of your art, your craft. So he's a writer, but he talked about how he got into movies and like really digging deep into movies. So reading reviews and essays and books all about movies and really learning to have this appreciation for the craft of making film and how that's influenced his writing. And so that's something worth exploring as well, is like develop your taste as a musician by listening again wide and deep, and also covering songs. I would consider that as an integral part of developing your artistry, is learning other people's songs. But then also like just learn to appreciate good work in other areas, like learn to appreciate craft in general, and maybe try to understand another art form and see how much that impacts what you're doing with music. And then that would apply obviously across the board.
That's a really interesting point. And because you've used language a lot when you're talking about music that is the same language we use in art. And so that would be actually for musicians a good place to look, is start looking at art, start learning about art, because when you start learning about the fundamentals of painting, I keep saying art. When I say art, I mean painting.
Yeah.
When you start looking at the fundamentals of painting, what you're going to see is you're going to see reference to texture and contrast and composition and tone. I mean, within the painting context, we're talking kind of color tone, but tone. And all of those things are applicable to music as well, which is really interesting. There is like a nice kind of, and same goes for me, like I should spend more time listening to music and thinking in those terms to help just kind of build that appreciation for a well-crafted thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's no coincidence that a lot of musicians are painters as well.
Yeah.
It's like Tony Bennett, I'm pretty sure, painted. Aaron Sterling, I just recently discovered. He's a great session drummer, and he goes on tour and stuff too. Played with like John Mayer and I think Taylor Swift and all of that. He paints, and he has like really cool looking paintings I saw on his Instagram, and he like sells them and everything too. And it's like there's definitely, I think, something to be said. Oh, my cat's coming to say hello and cause a little trouble. I think there's definitely something to be said for there being that overlap, the sort of natural overlap between
there's
painting and music.
Yeah, there's an interplay there too. Like it's I haven't really thought about this before, but it is kind of like, it's almost like, you know, music is a sister to painting. In that,
I love that.
Yeah, well,
that's
and it's
beautiful.
And vice versa. Because I'm just thinking, like, for me, like there's been time, like I don't right now. I'm not really listening to music as I paint. I'm listening to podcasts and stuff. But there have been times where I'm listening to music as I paint, and it creates an emotional energy that feeds into my artwork. I don't know if musicians probably don't say the same thing about, like, I don't know if art would have that same kind of impact in terms of creating music. I don't know, but
I'd be surprised if it didn't for somebody. Like, it hasn't for me, but I also don't spend a lot of time thinking about paintings.
Yeah,
so maybe that would change if I developed more of an appreciation.
Well, it's just like the nature of painting, right? Like you can put something in your ears and be listening, whereas like if you're creating music, you can't really be staring at a painting. Like there's not that same. I mean,
I'm just like have like the dual monitors, have a painting up on one and then my DAW up on the other. That'd be an interesting experiment to see if a painting would, like if I looked at a painting and then tried to create a piece of music that like evokes the same sensibility or emotion.
Yeah, well, because like Kandinsky is I think it was Kandinsky who did a lot of paintings. Yeah, because he like started naming his paintings like composition number 25. Or he was I could be wrong, but to my eyes anyways, he was painting sound. So that would be, regardless if I could be completely wrong here, regardless, his work would be a really interesting test of that, because if you were to look at his work, I think you would hear sound. I think it would spark ideas because it's abstract and there's a lot of movement and there's like a vibration to some of his work. And anyways, that would be a really cool experiment.
Mm-hmm. We should do an artistic taste swap where I can show you some music stuff and you can show me some art stuff. Like we can go to museums or something.
Ooh.
And you can like talk to me about the paintings.
Man.
And then we can do something like music related, like listen to an album or like go see a show or something.
Yeah.
Something like that. Because I'm very interested in that overlap.
Oh, that would be fun. I'm just thinking, like, I haven't gone to the National Gallery for so long because it's fun going there, particularly with people who don't know the history of art, because like I can kind of like show off my knowledge, which is, at this point, I forget a lot of what I learned, so it's pretty limited, but it sounds impressive.
Time to brush up.
It sounds impressive to people who have no understanding or art historical knowledge. Yeah, that would also be really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as a way for us to each sort of develop more of our taste in another artistic world. I was thinking in terms of, what I would do to do that. And I was thinking immediately like reading, literature, writing, like, but that's also, but I did have the thought that that's maybe I'm too close to that because I spend a lot of time writing as well.
Yeah.
It's something that I want to take very seriously. That might not be the best route to go. What Cal was saying was that it's helpful to go with a craft that is different than your own because there's not the same sense of like comparison.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to listen to incredible music, the chances of me listening to that and thinking, oh, my music doesn't sound like that, like, because I'm still trying very much to close that taste gap, that goes away when you look at another art form that's unrelated. So I feel like writing might be a little bit too close because my writing and my music are very linked in how I approach them. But art is something I'm totally like, I haven't done anything art related in 20 plus years.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like for me, I'm just like, is there certain types of music that are really far outside of what you do? Or like with writing, I'm thinking, look at poetry instead, like something like a style of writing that you don't do. And like, I'm thinking for me, I could, like, modern sculpture is outside of my realm, right? So I could probably, even though it's still like a form of visual art.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good point.
It's still, you can probably still find things within your realm that are far enough outside of what you do that you do have that kind of distance from it.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, that's very true. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that's definitely something I've wanted, and I have like in the past explored a little bit more. So I love jazz music, but I'm not a jazz musician.
Yeah.
Like there's like I've borrowed like hints of things from jazz, but I would never consider myself a jazz musician, nor do I have any aspirations to be, but I love listening to it. I have like a book all about like how to listen to jazz. And so something that's actually something you sort of rekindled my interest in maybe re-exploring that. I mean, I studied classical music in music school, but it's not something I really listen to. That would probably be a good avenue to explore. I actually just had the thought earlier today, like, I think I'd kind of like to get into classical guitar again, just for my own enjoyment.
Yeah.
Just to have something unrelated. As much as I like to talk about prioritizing the stuff that is like within your artistic voice. I think there's a lot of merit definitely to exploring things that are outside of that, just for fun, because music is my hobby as well. Like,
exactly.
I made it my career, but it's still my hobby. It's still something I love to do. So yeah, I'm very inspired to look into stuff like that too.
That's kind of the approach I've decided to take, where it's like I'm focusing the business around my art is going to be focused on my representational landscapes, but then I have the stuff on the side, which is the abstract, which is I'm going to explore more as a hobby, and have that kind of divide, just so it helps me focus my energy, but I'm not saying no to another thing that is still very important to the core of who I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely, there's room for both. That's cool. It made me laugh when you said you had a book on how to listen to jazz, because I'm like, that is so jazz.
You need somebody to break it down. I mean, to be fair, I also have a book just called How to Listen to Music by Aaron Copland, the great composer. So yeah, I love that idea of having something that helps walk you through it, because it's not intuitive. You have a sense of it. So like, especially the stuff you are used to hearing, you sort of have a sense of what it's supposed to sound like, but like to understand it, it's helpful to have this additional text, the explanation to really get into it. Because otherwise, like jazz especially is something that you appreciate a lot more when you have an understanding of how it works. Because otherwise it's gonna sound like, a lot of people like to make the joke about jazz, like everything just sounds wrong. It's like all the wrong notes. But if you understand it, it doesn't sound wrong anymore. It takes some time. It's a harder genre to get into. It's not quite as immediate. But yeah, and this is actually something, Cal has talked about. Again, he talked about watching movies, but like going to get insight from reviewers first. He talks about that with reading books as well. This is something I've been wanting to do with, like, I'm reading Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey, and something I found are some videos, and I found some extra essays and stuff about them, because it's like classic literature, of course, so it's very easy to find resources, but trying to like really dig in deep to something, like develop that appreciation. I think that's just a nice part of life, is going beyond just the surface of something. Like when you find something you're really interested in, getting to that point where your understanding starts to deepen, and there's just that extra sensitivity to what's happening. That's what I feel like as I listen to music now, with so many years of different experience. My relationship to it is very different. Like, it's still, but it doesn't feel any less meaningful than it did when I was just listening to music as a kid. I've always loved music, but it's just like, it's like this ever evolving relationship. It's like marrying somebody and you're still learning stuff about them years later, you can see, like, I never knew that about you. Like, and so I'll listen to music I've listened to for 20 plus years, and I go, I never heard that before.
Yeah,
but it's because now there's that sensitivity. And I think that's also ties into something I wanted to touch on as far as developing as a well-rounded, sturdy musician, is developing range. So there's this great book called Range by David Epstein, and he talks about, the benefits of being somebody who like develops this broad selection of skills. So I'd say that's a great thing to try to do, is like, if you do know an instrument already, consider learning another one as well. The one thing I'd sort of warn against is thinking about trying again to like put everything within the same day, like try to do everything. I did that for years. And I mean, it worked to some degree because I can play multiple instruments, but it was just very stressful to try to cram as much into a single day as possible. So you have to think long-term. This is very much like a slow productivity mentality, where over the years, if music is something you are actively engaged in, keep picking up different instruments every once in a while. So if maybe all you've been doing is playing guitar for a few years, pick up a keyboard or pick up a DAW. Just do something that's totally different. Like, I never would have thought getting Ableton would completely change the way I make music, but it did. And it was just something I stumbled into by accident. And now it's a huge part of my artistry. So sometimes you never know. And it's also just nice. Like I started learning drums years ago. I don't really play these days, again, just part of that's just being in an apartment and not having my drum set with me. But the fact that I have that, you know, even some level of training means that it informs how I write drum parts. And that's been very effective in helping me be well-rounded. And just being able to hear the drum parts in songs. Playing bass is the same thing. You'll start to pick out bass parts. You'll start to pick out things like production stuff is popping out to me now too. So as you continue with your life in music, try different things sometimes. Like that's a nice way to sort of take a break from your main instrument too, is to just go learn something else musical, just to see what it might have to offer. Because it's pretty wild too. I remember, you know, when I started taking piano more seriously, that was a really cool experience because it feels very different. Because by that point, I was playing guitar and I played some bass and stuff. And those are like similar enough that, you know, the mechanics felt more familiar, but playing a piano felt quite different. Yeah. And it was a real shock to my system. And I really enjoyed that. Like I liked the experience of having it start to feel more natural. I was like, whoa. Because I remember thinking the piano seemed like a total mystery to me. It was just like, there are so many keys. But once you learn, oh, it's just like, it's the musical alphabet and it's just every octave. Like once you learn that, then it's like, oh, it's nice to have something be demystified and to go, oh, it's just this. And, you know, now it feels accessible. That's a nice feeling to have within the world that you call home, artistically speaking.
Right.
You know, I'm never going to stop learning stuff about music. I'm just going to keep getting better and keep deepening my relationship with it. And I love that. So this ties into another recommendation, which is to just play the long game. You know, there's no rush. Take your time. You know, make sure you're consistent with the work that you're doing, because that is going to help you enjoy it more, because you're going to improve faster. So it's kind of like it's like this cycle. So when you are consistent with what you do, you'll improve faster. And as you start to improve, you want to spend more time doing it, and then you improve more. And it's like this cycle. So it's very helpful to think about the long game, but not let that be an excuse to procrastinate or put off practicing or doing the work. Like, just do the work. Find a way to engage with the work in a way that's satisfying in the moment, and learn how to enjoy the process and enjoy the messiness of the middle and all of that.
Yeah.
You know, take your time. There's no rush. Obsess over quality. So we're going to take it back to slow productivity. Do fewer things. So work on fewer things at the same time. Work at a natural pace. So don't do 12 hours a day if you can't do that. I would argue that probably nobody should be doing that. You're going to hit a point of diminishing returns. But that's another topic for another day. I'm not sure. I'm just sort of like framing some new ideas around that. I digress. Work at a natural pace. Do something every day that fits within your schedule. And yeah, obsess over quality. So really try to make whatever you're doing as good as possible if you're creating. But even I would extend that to just the act of practicing. Make your practicing be something that is high quality. Make sure you're doing it without distraction. Make sure you're being clear about the time that you set aside for music, and guard it with your life. Don't let somebody else take that time from you. Like, if you commit to that music time, you're committing to yourself and you're committing to music. So just stick with it, and, you know, try setting up some rituals if that helps. Do what you got to do to like get into the headspace, and then really enjoy the time. Enjoy the feeling of your brain stretching as you're trying to practice something, or feel, you know, the thrill of struggling to create a sound and then finally getting it. Like, it's a really thrilling experience. So enjoy the ride, and, you know, remember to focus on the fundamentals. Don't forget to learn songs too. So Robyn, what you were saying about just wanting to learn songs, there's a lot of validity to that. I think you get a lot of mileage out of learning songs. Just make sure you're going deep with them. So really cover as many bases as you can. If you're learning a song, try to learn it by ear if you can. You're going to remember it a lot better, and you're going to get a lot more out of it because you're also honing your musicianship skills. And then try to like analyze it, you know, and if you don't know where to begin with that, you can find resources online. You can book a lesson with a teacher who can help walk you through like what's happening within a song. That's going to help reveal a lot of your weak areas, and then you can go and pursue that further. And then, yeah, try to make sure you can play a song through from start to finish. That's a really important skill as well. And then maybe go and perform, and like, you know, you can do all sorts of things when you take the time to learn songs. So engage in practice, play, and projects is another note I made. So that's my 3 P's of musical action. Those are the 3 actions you can take as a musician, as I've defined them. So practice, obviously deliberate practice is really what pushes you forward. Play is really important just for your enjoyment, but also it's kind of part of how you find your voice, is just sometimes just noodling on your instrument or just playing around, just doing something without direction. You can gain a lot from that experience. And then projects, like having something specific you're working on with a clear end goal. This can be like writing an album. It can be a practice project. Maybe you want to learn every song off of like a Beatles record. That's a project with a clear goal and a clear end. That can be really helpful as well, thinking in those terms of like, how can you get the most out of the actions you're taking? Try to understand why you're working on something. So don't just take because I said so as an answer. Like if you're somebody who's taking lessons from a teacher and they give you something to practice, ask them why. And if they can't answer that, don't dismiss them right away. They might just not have thought about it. I didn't think about it for years. My approach to teaching was just to teach the stuff that I had learned, and I hadn't asked those questions. But now I try to ask myself, why am I practicing something? And how? Think about how. So it's like the what, the why, and the how. So what are you practicing? Why are you practicing it? And how are you practicing it? So the different ways you approach something matter. So we can talk about practicing scales, but how you practice them is gonna change depending on what your goal is. So knowing why you're doing something, how, that is all really valuable. That's something I'll probably dig into with a lot more depth at some point. Maybe not on the podcast specifically, but on my blog, in YouTube videos. This is stuff I've been thinking about a lot for a lot of years. So I'm starting to really clarify my thinking, and I'll be putting out stuff specifically to help musicians like really put this stuff into practice. The last little tip I'm going to give is to just be organized. You would be amazed at what a difference that makes for your musical growth, to just not have to think about what you did yesterday and not think about what you have to do tomorrow. So you can just very simply start by getting a notebook, just a plain notebook, or a fancy one if you're that way inclined. Like you could do that too if it makes it more fun to use. But I just use one of these 200-page Hilroy lined notebooks and just write down the date and write down what you practiced. Just start there. It's going to help you for a lot of reasons. So for one thing, it's going to help you think more about the process, because you're going to find satisfaction in filling up that notebook and seeing that you're committing to music and like you're actually following through. It's going to help you remember what you practice. So I never have to guess about what I last worked on. I can see I have years. I have like 7 years worth of notebooks now. I can see exactly what I've been doing, which is helpful because then it saves me time when I sit down to actually practice or work on something. I know exactly where I left off and where I need to go next. And also it's really helpful because if you're not seeing improvement, it can help you figure out why. So if you feel like you're not progressing the way you should be, maybe the reason is because you haven't been consistent. We sort of sometimes our memories are kind of foggy. So we might think, I feel like I've been practicing. But if you look at the notebook, it doesn't lie. If you've only practiced once or twice each week for like months, there's your first hurdle to overcome. Practice more. If you're practicing consistently, you can see, what have you been practicing? How? It helps you to just decipher what might be leading to really lackluster results. Because you should be, if you're practicing consistently and you're practicing the right things and in the right way, you should be seeing consistent improvement. You should be regularly noticing shifts in your proficiency, in your musicianship, and in your artistry. So if you're not, this will help you get to the bottom of it. And if you're really lost, get guidance, get a lesson from a teacher, have them help you. There's no shame in asking for help. You don't have to do this all on your own just because there are, millions of videos on YouTube. They can be very helpful. Again, they just offer pieces of the puzzle, but if you don't have the right guidance, the right boundaries, it can just be overwhelming and end up just feeling like a waste of time. So don't hesitate to go get help from somewhere.
The one thing I thought of too that I would add to that is in terms of like setting up your workspace to make things easy. So I remember a friend telling me like she bought me a guitar stand, and she's like, you'll be more likely to pick up the guitar if you don't have to take it out of its case. And which is hilarious. And it's so true. And I've noticed the same with my painting and stuff, right? If you want to work, if you want to be adding painting as like a daily routine, don't have your brushes in a closet and your easel tucked away and the canvases, like have it all conveniently laid out. So you, like have a jar with all your brushes right on your table and have your easel already out somewhere. Have a space, make a space where you can keep your supplies out if you can. And it doesn't have to be, I mean, like I was working on the kitchen table in a 1-bedroom apartment. Like you don't need a lot of space. You just find a corner of a room. That's all you need. And in fact, when I think of my studio, like I have a studio / office here, but my painting stuff is just in one corner. Like it's not like I don't need this whole room. I don't use this whole room for painting. I just have a little corner where I kind of do my work, right? So just reduce those barriers so that it makes it like just 1% easier to go and sit down and do the thing. That applies to anything you're wanting to do, whether it's creatively inclined or not.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And that's always advice I give to my guitar students is like, have your guitar out on a stand.
Yeah.
And that's actually something that James Clear talks about in his book, Atomic Habits. I think it might be, can't remember what he calls them, like the principles or rules of habit building or something. But one of them is like, make it easy.
Yeah.
Make it easy to do whatever the habit is that you're trying to build. And yeah, definitely having all your stuff ready at hand. Like I remember that when I was first starting guitar, I had my guitar out on a stand right next to my desk. This is at a time when, you know, I had internet in my room, but it was like super slow. So I'd be doing homework or something and I needed to check a website for information and it'd take a long time to load. I'd just grab my guitar and just play it while I was waiting for a page to load.
Right.
That time adds up. You know, there's a lot to be said for having designated practice time or creating time. But if you can also supplement that with just little pockets of time where you are taking 5 minutes just to like pick up your instrument or to paint a little something or draw a little something, that adds up. So having that as an option makes it easy to do. And this will also help you if you're somebody who is prone to like checking your phone impulsively. Put your phone away and have something creative around you. Have that instead. So, you know, I keep my guitars usually pretty close by so I can just easily grab one. Or I have like little keyboards and stuff here. It's just so easy. You know, reading is like the same thing. If you're somebody who's trying to read more, keep a book always at hand. And then that's going to be the better option because it's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent advice and definitely very important. Like setting up your environment to support the thing you're trying to do. And then to make it harder to do the things that are maybe taking you away from the thing you're trying to do. Which again, the phone is a really big one for people. I turn off my phone at night and put it in the closet just to like really keep it out of the way because, you know, I'm no different than anybody else. Like the temptation to just go and check things and scroll, like it's there for me too. And so you just have to set yourself up for success in everything you're doing. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's all I have to say on this subject at this point. I'd be really curious for anybody listening to this who is a musician or who's maybe just starting out, if you have any questions or if you're starting out in art or whatever, if you have questions for us, you know, please feel free to send them along because I would love to really help people. And I really also, I want to know what specific problems people are having that are keeping them from getting engaged with creating the way they want. Because I'm coming from my own perspective and then from the stuff I know I have students who have dealt with, but I know there are probably even more opportunities to improve my thinking, clarify my ideas, and make them more applicable to a broader array of creative people or musicians or whoever. So we'll be back to talk about this topic, I have no doubt. So for your week ahead, do you have any specific goals, any plans, or is it just kind of like another repeat week?
No. So next week, I think I said this last week too, where I wanted to try to get my website started in terms of the updates, but I didn't really do that. Instead, I got, you know, Google Workspace set up, which is like also part of that process. So this week it's just I guess it is much of the same in that I will be updating my website and I'm super excited to get that done. I also did, like last week, I also did some tedious stuff. Like I scan my artwork because that's like the best way of getting like the high quality images of it. And so I did go through and scan like all of the little paintings I've done for the 100-day project so far. And so I can, at least those can be some samples that I can put on my website for now. Because my style has, in terms of my representational work, my style has shifted since I last was kind of doing representational work. So I was like, I need some updated photos on there to kind of, this is where I'm at now. This is what, if you commission me, this is the kind of style you're going to get. So I have some of that work done. So it is just like adding the website copy and making sure everything works and all that stuff. So it shouldn't take too long, but that is kind of the goal for this week. How about you?
I think my week is just gonna be a repeat of last week. Just continuing with my routine. I feel great doing it. It's working well. Doing my practice and my work on my album, doing writing for my blog again. This is going to be week 3 of the Artist Way. So I have that. And I don't really want to take on too much else at this point. I'm pretty happy with what I've got going on. I do want to start thinking more seriously about stuff for YouTube, and I have been. So that's something that is on my mind, and I'll be, especially as I'm more established in my routine, I'll be thinking about again. But yeah, other than that, I don't think I have anything unusual going on or any goals that are out of the ordinary. All right, well, thank you everyone for tuning in. You can send questions and comments and insights to streamofartpodcast@gmail.com, and we are still accepting submissions for people's pet pictures. We still want to see people's pets, or you can add those also to our Discord. So you can join our Discord. There's a link in the show notes. We have a channel now specifically for pet pictures. There is a picture of my cat, and there's a picture of Robyn's dog. So you can go look at them.
It's worth joining just for those pictures.
Just for those pictures, yeah. And you can follow us on Instagram. We are at Stream of Art Podcast. You can follow Robyn on Instagram. You can check out her website and get ready for her exciting newsletter.
Woo.
Go to the website and either sign up for her newsletter or angrily close.
Yes, the pop-up.
The pop-up. Don't do that. Sign up for her newsletter. Support an artist. And I think that's it. I'm very tired. It's I was going, now the conversation, when a conversation ends and you all of a sudden feel like that's all the gas I had in the tank.
Yeah.
And it's just gone. If I have forgotten anything, it's probably not that important.
And it'll be in the show notes.
Yeah. Something I keep forgetting to mention is that I started adding timestamps in the show notes. So if you're somebody who's been watching or listening to the episodes and maybe you hear something and you want to go back later, chances are pretty good now there's a timestamp for it. I'm trying to find the right balance, because then if I go too crazy, I'm doing a timestamp every like 2 or 3 minutes.
Right.
So I'm trying to, mark the ones that feel significant to me, which is why there are so many, because I feel like, oh, that's a good point. That's great. Yeah, okay. So I'm trying to find a good balance. I think for a while trying to do just like 2 or 3, just like, the main segments, but I feel like there's too many things. So, and because our episodes run a little bit longer, anyways, all that to say, that's a thing. Go check it out if you're interested, or if you just want to like skip past our update because you don't care about us.
Yeah, we won't take it personally.
Well, it's gonna hurt, but we'll be okay.
Gonna have to journal about that tonight too. Oh,
yeah. It's a good thing I do 3 pages in the morning.
Yeah.
It's taking up it's eating into my reading time, which is something I'm gonna have to calibrate for.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great week, weekend, whenever you're listening to this. And we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.